It was the moon that first warned us, or so they say. Every year, when the crops would start to show, the village of Ayotunde, tucked away in the heart of Nigeria, would be blessed with an abundance like no other. The fields would overflow with cassava, maize, yams, and plantains. The harvest would be so bountiful, it seemed like we'd never go hungry again. But there was a price. A heavy one. I remember it like it was yesterday, even though it happened a long time ago. The village had long known of the curse. It was a secret passed down from our elders, whispered quietly in the dark when the wind howled, or when people were too afraid to speak too loudly. Every year, as the crops ripened, the curse began to take hold. People who ate the harvest would simply vanish, their bodies never to be found again. Their families would search for them, day and night, but all they'd find were their footprints leading into the fields, then nothing. The moon would be full, and they'd disappear, as if swallowed by the earth itself. Some called it punishment from the gods, others said it was the work of spirits. Whatever it was, we had to live with it. But there was one family, the Ayotundes, who were desperate. The father, Deji, was a hardworking man with a heart full of hope. His wife, Adebisi, was gentle but carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. They had a son, Ayotunde, who was the joy of their life. He was a bright, curious boy, always asking questions and running around in the fields like he was born for the earth itself. One year, when the harvest was more abundant than ever before, something changed. People began to talk more openly about the curse. Whispers turned into complaints. The fear of losing loved ones grew unbearable. Some families left Ayotunde, hoping to escape the curse's grip. But the Ayotundes stayed behind. They had no choice. You see, Deji had a plan. While the rest of us prepared for the curse to take its toll, he secretly kept some of the harvest. He couldn't bear the thought of his family starving after the crops were gone. He told Adebisi about his plan, and though she was hesitant, she agreed. They would hide the food, and maybe, just maybe, they could survive the curse this time. They didn't tell Ayotunde, he was too young to understand, and they didn't want to worry him. But as the full moon approached, Deji and Adebisi noticed something strange in their son. Ayotunde began to act differently. His once bright eyes grew dull, and his once playful nature became cold and distant. He no longer laughed with his friends, and his once sweet voice was replaced with a deep, unsettling tone that didn't belong to him. One evening, as the full moon rose over Ayotunde, Deji went to check on Ayotunde. He found his son sitting alone in the corner of their hut, staring blankly at the wall. Ayotunde, what's wrong? Deji asked, his voice filled with concern. The boy didn't respond. Instead, he began to hum an eerie song, one that Deji had never heard before. It sounded like a chant, and the more he listened, the more it sent a chill down his spine. The boy's face remained expressionless, but his eyes were no longer those of a child. There was something ancient and terrifying in them, something that made Deji's blood run cold. Adebisi, who had been watching from the doorway, gasped when she saw her son. She stepped back, trembling. Deji, what have we done? She whispered, fear creeping into her voice. Deji couldn't answer. He didn't know. All he knew was that his son was no longer the same. That night, the full moon rose higher in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the village. Deji and Adebisi tried to talk to Ayotunde, to reach the boy they once knew, but it was no use. The child they had raised was gone. In his place was something dark, something that didn't belong. As the days passed, Ayotunde's behavior grew stranger. He would wander out into the field at night, walking in circles, muttering to himself. When anyone tried to approach him, he would snap at them, his voice sharp and unnatural. Leave me alone, he would say, though his tone was not his own. I am not your son. Deji and Adebisi could no longer recognize him. The villagers, too, began to notice. They said the boy was possessed by an evil spirit, that the curse had claimed him as its own. Some believed he had become a part of the curse, a vessel for something far worse than anyone could understand. One evening, as Deji sat alone in the hut, thinking about everything that had happened, Adebisi came to him with tears in her eyes. "What are we going to do?" she asked. "He's not our son anymore, is he?" Deji couldn't answer. He didn't know. But what he did know was that something had to be done before the curse took even more from them. They sought help from the elders, but the answer was always the same: the curse is not to be tampered with. It must run its course. But Deji couldn't accept that. He loved his son too much. So, in desperation, he made a decision. One night, under the cover of darkness, he took Ayotunde into the fields. The same fields that had given them the harvest that had started all of this. He stood there, in the middle of the crops, holding his son tightly. "Ayotunde," he whispered, "if you are still my son, come back to me. I can't lose you." For a moment, the boy's eyes flickered, just for a second. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, he collapsed into his father's arms, crying out for his mother. Deji wept, holding his son as the moon rose above them, casting its light on the field. But the moment was fleeting. Ayotunde's cry soon turned into a strange laugh, a laugh that wasn't his own. And then, just as quickly as he had collapsed, the boy began to disappear, fading into the night like smoke. Deji and Adebisi were left standing there, staring at the empty space where their son had been, heartbroken and defeated. The curse had claimed him. The harvest would never be the same for Ayotunde again. The villagers would learn a hard lesson that year. The land that gave them life could just as easily take it away. Sometimes, in the quiet nights when the wind howls through the village, you can still hear Ayotunde's eerie song, carried on the breeze. And sometimes, if you listen closely, you can hear the voices of those who were lost, vanished by the curse, never to return. And that, my friend, is the price of desperation. The price of tampering with what should never be tampered with.